In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your Pitman arm on this Chevy Silverado 2500. Let's install this brand new TRQ part. Take a 15mm socket and remove the 4 15mm bolts that hold this splash shield on to get it off here. Hold on to it, take the last one off. Let's also remove this skid plate, same 15mm bolts. With these shields out of the way, let's remove the sway bar. We have to remove it in order to get access to one of the bolts that holds the steering gearbox in place, which of course we have to remove for this job. On each side you'll see the bracket for the sway bar. There will be two 10mm bolts going through each of these sway bar brackets, so let's remove them both. Do the same to the other side, but keep in mind this is all that's holding this up, other than the sway bar links of course, so it's going to want to drop down a little bit once you get these two out. Alright, there we go, that's all we needed. With the shields down, if you look up, you'll see the steering box, and right there is the line that we're after. Grab some pliers, try to squeeze this clamp so we can get the hose off. Regular pliers are proving to be a little bit difficult, and since I have this tool, I'm going to use it. It's a hose clamp plier. What it does is it grabs onto that hose clamp and locks it open until you are ready to remove it. Okay, I'm going to get a collection bucket because as soon as we pop that hose off, power steering fluid will start to leak out. The reason I didn't bother draining the reservoir is because no matter how much you drain it, stuff is still going to leak from down here. So grab a pry bar, try to pry the hose off of the line. There we go. Just let that drain. Right next to the hose that we just took off is the other line. Use an 18mm flare nut wrench and break the fitting free, and then we'll have to remove the fitting so we can pop the line off. That one does not have a hose, it's the pressure line, so it's just a steel line. Got my 18mm wrench on here. I'm going to try and break that free. All right. Use some leverage from a pry bar if needed. I'm going to switch over to a regular open-ended wrench because it's a lot easier to work with. I'm going to wire brush this area a little bit. Hopefully I can get some of that debris off before the line comes off. Try to avoid getting it inside the gearbox or steering box. Okay. This can be removed now. Use an 11mm socket to disconnect the steering shaft retainer bolt. If you can't directly get to it, just turn the steering wheel until you can. And now we have to get the steering shaft disconnected from the steering box. Usually that requires some prying and some hammering. So I'm going to avoid beating on the U-joint, whether it's prying it or hammering it, and I'm going to mainly focus on down here just to separate this joint from the steering box. Okay, it seemed like it moved a little bit, so now we can continue by unbolting the steering box so we can remove it from the frame. 3 24mm bolts hold the steering box onto the frame. This is exactly why we had to remove the sway bar off of the frame so we can pivot it and get to this one right here, otherwise there will be some serious clearance issues. So, doesn't matter where you start, just remove them all. Let's disconnect the Pitman arm stud from the steering linkage. To do this, you need a deep 24mm socket. Remove this nut. Now you can try to hammer this upwards. Most likely it will not work, and we'll try to use a puller instead. But of course I'm still going to give it a try just in case. Got it. This is now kind of an all-in-one process where the steering box has to pivot and go up and sideways, pretty much all directions at the same time, so you can unhook the Pitman arm from the steering linkage and the steering shaft, and obviously this has to then come out. It's being extra stubborn, so I'm going to use this puller to hold upwards pressure on it, because as soon as I pop this stud out and then try to move the gearbox, it pops right back in, and doing this might actually help me get that stud out. Okay, I'm going to bottom this tool out like this. Now with everything on the bench, you're going to need a 1 13/16 socket. It's very large, equivalent of a 46mm socket. That is what's going to fit on this Pitman arm nut. I'm going to take a wire brush, try to brush some of these threads off a little bit, get some of that rust broken free. Spray it down one last time with rust penetrant. Hold on to it really tight, and let's take off the nut. Get this off, take off the lock washer, and now we have to get the Pitman arm off of the steering box. This is actually going to be very challenging because they're usually pressed on here and rusty in this case. Now you have several options of removing this. I'm going to start out by trying to use this 3-jaw puller because it is the most safe and effective option. And if that doesn't work, we're going to escalate it. But for now, I'm going to try to do it this way. Make sure these jaws actually clamp on tight. Get some rust penetrant soaking in here. And start tightening the puller, and we'll see if it pops it free. I'm going to put this nut back on just a few turns so that I don't have this go flying if it does end up popping off suddenly. Nothing's working so far, so while it's under pressure, I'm going to apply some heat very gently. I don't want to destroy all the seals and everything that's inside that gearbox, steering box, but I do want to heat up the Pitman arm a little bit in hopes that it will break free. Well, that worked. So let's get this off of here. Got the mounting nut off. It did its job. It prevented this from basically flying off. And remove your Pitman arm. Because of its current condition, I'm going to clean off this Pitman arm shaft here that comes out of the steering box with a wire wheel on my drill. Hopefully yours isn't as bad, and well, hopefully yours didn't take that much effort to come off, but usually they are fairly stuck on there. So do your best to clean it up, and I'm going to apply anti-seize to the splines here so that hopefully, if it ever has to be removed again, it may come off a little bit easier. Now take your new Pitman arm and line it up. It's going to have some alignment splines here. And once you do line it up, it should fall right down into place. There we go, right there. Once you're sure that everything is seated correctly, put that lock washer down and the mounting nut. This is not a locking nut, that's why you need the lock washer. The torque for this is 273 foot-pounds. I'm going to drive this down with my air impact, and then I'm going to put my torque wrench on it. My torque wrench only goes to 250 foot-pounds, but I'm just going to go a little bit extra past 250. That should get it torqued down close enough to 273. With an extremely high torque number like that, if you're just a tiny bit off, it's going to be close enough. Now that I've seated the Pitman arm, more or less, I'm going to back this off just a little bit. Push the Pitman arm all the way until the steering box stops turning. And that's how you basically get it to stay in place and, well, torque it. All right, that's 250. Just going to give it a little extra. Okay. Whew. That should be torqued down right there. Grab your steering box and put it right back up into place. Okay, there we go. Okay, it's close. It's in the area that it needs to be in. Now we have to simultaneously put the Pitman arm into the steering linkage, the steering shaft into the box, and of course line it up with the bolt holes. There we go. Okay, perfect. I'm gonna get that nut on just started so that I'm sure that when I lift it to fit everything else, it doesn't pop back out. That would be a struggle. I'm gonna start one bolt in through here, and I'm gonna push up on the steering box, try to get it started into its threads. Oh yeah, that starts perfectly fine. Yep, second one starts good. And I guess might as well line up the third one now. That one's at the top, and that one seems to start in fine as well. Now let's tighten these down, get the steering box clamped on the frame, then we can put the steering shaft back in. Okay, let's torque these down. Torque these bolts to 203 foot-pounds. Okay, those are all torqued. Now let's get the steering shaft connected onto the steering box. Move the wheels just a little bit because my steering box turned. Right there should be lined up. Oh, too much. There we go. That's exactly where it was. You have to basically remember its position and Try not to move it too much. If you're off by a turn, you'll know because you can't turn the steering wheel the right amount of turns. So all you have to do at that point is just come down here and, well, recenter it. It's slotted only on one side, so you'll be an entire turn off. You'll know. Pull the steering shaft down. Hopefully at this point, now that we've pushed it up, the collapsible part should have loosened up enough to where you could just slide it down. I put a bunch of indices on here. I like to do that so that it comes off easier in the future. Get this bolt threaded in. There we go. Turn that so you can get better access to it. Let's get this bolt nice and tight. If you want to, you can put a little bit of thread locker on it. The torque for this is 35 foot-pounds. That's 35. Let's tighten up the Pitman arm nut. 24mm socket. The torque on this is 92 foot-pounds. That's it. It's time to reconnect the lines. I'm going to start with the one that has a threaded fitting right on the line here, as it will be more difficult to put in. Inspect your O-ring to make sure it's still good. Start the fitting in, and then let's get a wrench and tighten it down. Pretty sure I just got this started. Let's put a wrench on it. Yep, that's started. That's bottomed out. I'm gonna get my longer wrench here, one that I used to break it free, which is the flare nut wrench, so I can get better grip and more leverage on it. Just gonna snug this up nice and tight. There is an O-ring there. That's what's gonna seal it up. Don't worry about crushing any sort of flared fitting. Actually, if you over tighten it, you can actually break that O-ring and then it will not seal up, so keep that in mind. That's pretty tight. I know it probably sounds like I made it tighter than I actually did, but I really don't have much room, so I was just using the tips of my fingers. That is snugged up. Let's put the hose back on this fitting. There we go. So that's centered. Just have to squeeze that clamp down. There we go. Put the hose clamp on it. That's seated. Release the clamp. Lift up on the sway bar, and let's start in the mounting bolts for it. Once you get one in, it should stay. Before I tighten this up completely, I'm going to put the other side on. Snug them up. The torque for all four of these is 37 foot-pounds. Let's get this skid plate back. Snug up all four 15mm headed bolts. And get this shield in the front back as well. It had the same bolts. Snug these up as well, but be careful, this is plastic, so if you over tighten it, it will crack the plastic. Looks like that has already happened here, so I'm gonna try and be gentle. There we go. Now let's fill up the power steering fluid. Remove the cap. This reservoir is located to the right of the alternator. Pull that off. You can see that it has a dipstick. That's how we're going to measure it at the end. I'm going to put a funnel in here just so I don't spill everywhere. I'm going to add about ½ quart of power steering fluid. And what I'm going to do now is just quickly double check it with the dipstick As you can see, it is overfilled. However, we do need to bleed the system, so that's fine. I'm gonna just place the cap right here, not tighten it. And what you wanna do now is get in the vehicle, turn the steering wheel with the engine off, left to right, all the way lock to lock several times. After several rotations, you'll see that the fluid will go down, top it off as needed, and then of course, do this again. Once it stops going down and air stops coming out, that means you have fully bled the lines. Top it off again, or at least check it if it's already right, and then cap it off completely. You can also do the same thing at the end with the engine running. However, if the pump is whining very loudly, let it sit for a little bit, because most likely that means there's still some air in the system. And if you let it sit, it should naturally bleed out.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.